Hi, I'm David Dusek, a senior writer with Golfweek, golfweek.com, as well as USA Today Sports. And I'm here to learn as much as I can about one of the hottest new wood shafts out on the PGA Tour, specifically the Mitsubishi Tensei Pro White 1K. And to do that, I've brought in a couple people who know a lot about it. First is going to be Tod Boretto, who's a materials engineer with Mitsubishi. Todd, how you doing, pal?
Good, David. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. And I've also got Avery Reed, who is Mitsubishi's manager of tour promotions. Avery, how are things going?
I'm great, David. How you doing?
I'm doing really, really well. So you guys were able to send me one of these things. This is like magical stuff right here. And Todd, looking at Mitsubishi's website, there's a really interesting sentence there that describes what you're trying to do with the Tensei Pro White 1K, which is pretty amazing. This shaft, according to you guys, was built for players who were seeking perfection. Nothing like a lofty aspiration there, but it seems like one of the big, most important things about this shaft is this new material called 1K. Can you explain to me what 1K is all about?
Sure. So 1K stands for 1,000 filaments. And in a carbon fiber toe, a toe is made up of thousands of filaments, which is then woven into a woven weave, which is then applied to the shaft. Most carbon fiber toes and fabrics are 3,000 filaments or 6,000 or 12,000 filaments, all the way up to 24,000. And what happens is as you start to increase the filament size, the thickness of the weave starts to increase and the weight increases. So this 1K material is actually 1,000 filaments. And a filament, just so you're aware of this, is the size of a human hair. So if you think of it in terms of a human hair, there's 1,000 filaments in a toe. And what that allows us to do is make a woven material that's very thin and very lightweight. And that's basically the 1K material. It's used a lot in satellite structures and really high performance aircraft and composite structures. And we've taken that now and brought it into the golf shaft arena.
So this is about, it sounds like about as most premium type of a material as you're going to be able to put in a golf shaft. Is that correct?
That's correct. Along with the boron that's also in this design, also a very exotic material, very expensive. And that's also in there for obvious reasons for stability and compressive strength down in the tip section. So it's a combination of materials and also where we locate the weave. The 1K weave is very important. If you look at the history of Tensei back in 2016, we started off with a carbon Kevlar weave, and then we transgressed into the aluminum vapor line, and now we have the 1K. And the 1K, compared to the other Tenseis before it, is much thinner, and it's all carbon versus a combination of aluminum coated fiber and also the Kevlar carbon.
So Avery, all that stuff sounds really space age and high tech and Buck Rogers and something like that. But at the end of the day, when you're out there working with players on the PGA Tour, they're all about performance. How much do you get into conversations with players about the differences in the manufacturing of the weaves and the carbon fibers? So these guys all just want to know, is it going to help them hit it straighter and farther and all that? Do you get into this kind of stuff with the best players out there?
Yeah, well, David, that's actually a good question. And to be honest, there's actually multiple personalities out there. So it's understanding the player that you're working with. I think everybody would be kind of surprised if they knew how many players actually research shafts and look it up and spend their time online. And so actually, a lot of the times I'll get a lot of questions first about the shaft and material and that sort of thing. But it's like you said, at the end of the day, for them, it's performance. So it has to outperform what they're currently playing if they're going to put it in play out there.
So, Todd, back to you real quick. All of Mitsubishi shafts are designed to be really high performing and to fit the players as best you can. You have different models to fit different player types. What is it about the 1K material? I mean, I understand from a construction standpoint, you described it as being, a little bit more premium, but at the same time, how does it differ in terms of what it's going to do? How does that change in the way that you actually make the carbon and work it into the shaft, change the way it performs?
Good question. So what we discovered and what we found is that by putting materials like Kevlar and aluminum vapor into this shaft design, we in essence block out a lot of the key vibrations coming up into the player's hands. And so we've basically migrated from two materials that dampen virtually every frequency that's coming up into the player's hands. So the player's not getting that feedback, especially a better player that needs to get that feedback to know where in the face he's hitting the ball. Like a low toe hit versus a high heel hit is going to feel different. It's going to transfer those frequencies up to the player differently. If we block them all out, then the player has no feel. right? And that's not a good thing. So what we've done is, if you look at the Kevlar, which is a really good damping material, and aluminum also, we've taken that out of the design now, and it's all carbon. But there's also a key function of where we place that fabric. And if you notice, it's right below the grip, and all it extends down to basically the center point of the shaft. And that's where most of the modal vibrations are coming through to the player. That's the key location in a shaft where we can either dampen certain frequencies or let certain frequencies come through to the player. And that's what we've done. That's why we've gone to all carbon, and we've gone to a thinner weave, this 1K weave.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, in some ways, if I'm reading you correctly, it sounds like the use of the materials, what you're putting in and what you're choosing to keep out, is changing the feel of this. In some ways, it's very similar maybe to a sports car versus sort of a luxury sedan. The sports car, you're going to feel every little bump on the highway. And that's what people who are driving for performance, if you're racing, that's what you want. If you're looking to sort of cruise along at 65 on the highway and just want a smooth ride, you're going to get a different kind of a feel. Is that sort of the same way?
Yeah, that's actually a really good analogy, because that's exactly what we're trying to do here. I mean, a high performance sports car and a race car driver, they need that feedback to know if they're pushing the limits. And the same thing with a golf shaft and a wood, driver club, especially where your speeds are the highest. And locating that, or knowing where you're hitting that ball in the face for instant feedback, is really important. When you're out on course, you don't have technology like gears and TrackMan and so forth. You have to rely on your feel. And apart from where that ball is going, it can still go straight and down the fairway, but getting that kind of feedback into a better player, a player's hands, whether it be a novice or even the better player, is important. So that's what we've done.
So Avery, when you're working with players and talking with players who've had an opportunity to try 1K at this point, what are you hearing from them? This is a shaft that's already won, if I'm not mistaken, on the Corn Ferry Tour, the LPGA
Yep.
Tour. It's starting to gain a little bit momentum on the PGA Tour. What do players tell you about 1K?
Yeah, actually, it's had back-to-back wins for the last 2 weeks on Corn Ferry Tour, which has been very exciting for us, just considering how new the shaft is. But it's kind of funny. It's almost exactly what Tod just said. Those guys obviously don't know, how to explain things, but I would say the biggest thing that we're seeing out there is guys hit it, and there's two things. Number one, the first thing they do is they talk about the feel, and it feels extraordinary. As far as performance, they all say that it feels softer than it actually performs.
Hmm.
For us, the white is a low launch, low spin part. And when those guys hit it, and we saw that a lot with the CK Pro as well. Guys they know their window and they know what the shaft feels like. So when they hit, they actually kind of look up thinking the ball is going to be going a little bit higher, a little bit more spin, and it's staying right in their window. And then based on the feel, they can't believe that it's actually staying where it's supposed to. And they're getting so much feedback.
So we heard Todd talk a lot about feel and trying to create a shaft, Avery, that's going to give players the maximum amount of feel and feedback.
Yep.
How
Yep.
important is feel for players at the highest level? I mean, it's one thing to sort of hear an engineer, all offense, Todd, talk about wanting to give more feedback, but when players are out there, if they're saying it, they're anticipating it's going to feel softer, it's going to hit there, but then it's still hitting that window that they
Yes.
all demand out there.
Yeah.
Does it throw them at first? Is it something that they like? Is it pleasing? What are they looking for when they say, like, it feels different?
Feels different. Yeah. So, and I think Todd touched on it a little bit too. I mean, when it comes to feel, what it is at impact, it's timing. So these guys, the most important thing for them is they need to find the center of the club face. And
Mhm.
if they know where that club face is at impact, which is what they're feeling, they can time it up a lot better. And in return, we see an increase in ball speed. We see an increase in dispersion
Mm.
pattern. If the guy has no feel and he's hitting it off the toe, but he doesn't know that he's hitting it off the toe, and then he hits one off the heel, we see a wide range of spin rates. We see dispersion pattern go way out. So for these guys, feel is extremely important because they need to time it.
So in some ways, this shaft is actually going to help them to hone and be more precise. It's sort of a counterintuitive thing because
100%. Yep.
they're swinging so fast in many cases, but it's giving them that feedback and it's going to help them along the way.
Yeah.
Todd, Mitsubishi's use a lot of different materials that you've already sort of alluded to in shafts. Obviously, graphite being one thing. You talked about aluminum vapor. You've talked about nickel also being used in some sections, especially down near the tip section in previous Mitsubishi shafts. In this case, you've got boron that's been put in place. How do you guys test out different types of exotic materials in golf shafts, and how did you come about getting boron? What is the boron doing in this particular shaft?
Good question. So boron is a silicon carbide fiber that is very high compressive strength and relatively low density, around 2.4, compared to steel that's around 7.8. So it's lightweight and it's got incredible compressive strength. Think of it as a rigid column like in concrete, where you have rebar, steel rebar within concrete. The boron itself down in the tip gives you incredible tip stability, number one, but also really good tip strength. And as these shafts get lighter and lighter and thinner in the wall, the strength side of it becomes a real important factor. Again, these materials, they've been used in composite wings and F-16 fighter jets, F-18 fighter jets. So these materials have been in use for some time. They're very expensive, but they have a really unique window of where they really shine. The material itself is really difficult to work with in the factory, but we've overcome those obstacles, and it is an exotic material. So again, Tensei, we're blending these technologies, we're combining them to give this shaft in particular the best possible strength and performance in every aspect and feel.
Yeah.
Avery, how discerning are players, on the LPGA Tour, the PGA Tour, the Korn Ferry Tour, the folks
Yeah.
that you work with on a day-to-day basis? How discerning are they in terms of not just the bend profile of a shaft, but we're talking about the way that it bends in the tip? In some
Yeah.
other ones we've talked about the way that it bends in the flexing, in the midsection, the butt section. How much do they really dial in on exactly where a shaft is bending and how it's going to help them perform?
Well, again, yeah, I mean that's always a consistent battle, and we've got to figure out, number one, what type of player that we're working with, because everybody out there has different swings.
Mhm.
So that's why you see different bend profiles throughout our lines. Obviously the red, white, and blue. So figuring out the player's type is important, and then number two is stability at impact, and being, like we discussed earlier, being able to return that club back to the same exact spot every single time becomes extremely important. So the more stability we can have in the tip section, the better. And we see, a lot of guys, counter to what a lot of fitters out there see sometimes, is, you give a profile that's too soft to a guy, and in return it's lagging behind because of the shaft deflection. So
Yep.
we see a decrease in dynamic loft, and in return you see a lower launch, lower spin. So sometimes they're like, oh, we need to go softer, when actually there's not enough stability in the tip section. So having that boron really adds that stability in all the profiles.
So, Avery, I've got one last question I want to ask you. So, obviously, shaft has become extremely popular, the Tensei Pro White 1K out
Yeah.
there on the PGA Tour. And we talked about the Korn Ferry Tour. It's being a white band, it's got a low launch condition, low spin. But I would imagine that there could be some openings potentially to expand on the 1K and maybe go into some different bend profiles. Do you think in the next couple of years we may see something like that?
Yeah, I think, obviously based on the success we've already had with the 1K white, we've still got a lot of guys that play Tensei orange, play Tensei blue on the PGA Tour. We also have a huge presence this year on the LPGA, and we've had a lot of success with the Diamante TB out there, which is a blue bend profile. So, I think out there especially, there's going to be a need for 1K blue. I mean, 1K white's already won on LPGA, but I think that there's a definite need on all tours for different profiles. So definitely something we'll be working on for the future.
Cool. Well, listen, Todd, Avery, both thanks very, very much for cluing me in and giving me some really cool information about this new hot shaft from Mitsubishi.
Thanks, David. I appreciate your time.
Likewise, David, thank you.